Hi, my name is Rachel Oswald. I'm a reporter with National Journal's Global Security Newswire. I'm here today at the Belfer Center where I will be interviewing the authors of a new report on the effort to secure plutonium at the former Soviet nuclear weapons test site. I'm here with Eben Harrell and David Hoffman. So, congratulations, both of you, on a really excellent report. I think it has a lot to offer to both nuclear policy wonks and also kind of general readers who are interested in getting a glimpse of some of the behind-the-scenes events in the Cold War arms race. The nuclear weapons program of the Soviet Union was such a huge, tightly held secret for so long. There were so many mysteries about what was happening, who was doing what, for so long, even after the collapse of the USSR. What enabled you to get the kind of access that you had in this report where you were interviewing scientists who are right in the thick of it?
Well, I think it was twofold. I was able to travel to Semipalatinsk. I think it's sort of a great kind of rule of thumb of research and journalism that, if you go on location, you will get good stuff. And in fact, I did. People opened up to me in this sort of bizarre environment out on the steppe in Kazakhstan and told me quite a bit about the operation as it happened. And then we had this other terrific resource back here in the U.S., which is David's relationships long formed with U.S. scientists and officials. And it was he who really managed to dig out the story about how the whole operation started.
And so on the one hand, it's gratifying to know that there are such good public servants that are out there, but at the same time, it's a little disturbing to know that there were not necessarily structural government processes in place that would have otherwise caught this enormous nuclear security crisis going on if it had not been for those particular individuals being where they were and having enough sway to get the ball moving. What are your impressions of that aspect of the story?
Over the period of Nunn-Lugar, from when essentially it first was started by Congress in '92 until the last bit of this thing was finished, Nunn-Lugar spent $1 billion plus going into all kinds of strange places in the former Soviet Union, and this one was not one of them until it was discovered, until Sig Hecker and later Andy Weber pressed the governments to do something about it. So you mentioned structures, but the whole process really here was motivated by individuals who saw the danger. And we see this happen over and over and over again. Whether it's the biological weapons facilities, both in Kazakhstan and in Russia, even chemical weapons. These things have always been sort of rocks that were kicked over by people that had an inspiration or maybe a little bit of trust with somebody. And it wasn't like you could just go to Semipalatinsk and knock on the door and say, "Let me in." A lot of this involved trust. And in the case of Dr. Hecker, he had spent years trying to build bridges to the weapon scientists in Russia. And so when they needed to be pressed to reveal the details, it wasn't just because he sent them an email. He actually went there. He cajoled them. He tried to shame them. And Andy Weber, the same thing. Project Sapphire, which was another big airlift of fissile material out of Kazakhstan. The day that Andy Weber heard about that was because somebody trusted his mechanic, who probably had good connections, passed a note, handwritten little note that said 200, U-235, 1,000 pounds. Are you interested?
I read that article. Yeah.
That note was essentially a contact from somebody who didn't know Andy Weber, who had that fissile material. So a real question for the future is, how do you sustain this kind of detective work by individuals and in an environment when basically we have government programs and think that they're going to solve everything?
What Sig Hecker, the former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, said is that one of the things that informed his thinking was that he knew where our bones were buried, and so he mirror imaged what we did and imagined what a mess probably was in the Soviet Union. One of the anecdotes that David uncovered when he was interviewing Sig is this sort of internal pledge that Sig made when he was retiring as director of Los Alamos, that he was going to become what he described as a plutonium hunter. He was going to go after those caches of material that might have fallen off the radar.
Because of Sig's work, the three countries made an agreement in 1998 that the United States would provide the funding to remediate this problem, the Kazakhs would provide the muscle and some of the materials, and the Russians would supply the data, the information. Now, over the next 10 to 15 years, The Russians supplied the data at the speed of a trickle. We provided a lot of money, more than $150 million to do it. The Kazakhs brought the cement and the concrete and the trucks and some other things and the labor. But the Russians had to be constantly pushed. And the report shows that even in 2005 and 2007, when one of the most sensitive pieces of plutonium was finally revealed to the Americans and the Kazakhs, we're talking about more than, almost 10 years. The Russians had this information. It wasn't like they opened an old shoebox. And they dribbled it out. And they were very, very reluctant. And the reason for that goes back to my earlier point about secrecy. This was just a Cold War mindset that everything had to be secret and was competitive. And so it wasn't just an appearance of being slow. They were slow.
One of the things that I think that David and I struggled to get our heads around as we kind of wrote the paper was, how do we balance, on the one hand, this sense of sort of, or this obvious portrait of kind of individual heroism. The Sig hackers, there was another American, Byron Nisvet, the Kazakhs who brought it to the U.S. attention and worked with them, and then some of the Russians too who broke through that wall of secrecy. How do you balance that on the one hand with what on the other hand could be argued was sort of a collective failure? It took 17 years to deal with what was an undisputable security threat. I mean, almost 2 decades, a period that saw the rise of Al-Qaeda, 9/11 attacks, etc. So we thought a lot about that balance between the individual initiative and also perhaps the sort of high-level impasse breaking that needs to go on to sort of expedite these kind of operations. The Kazakhs, understandably, are very concerned about developing the area around Semipalatinsk. It's been discovered to be rich in many sort of extractable minerals, etc. So I think they're going to need to balance, on the one hand, this need to sort of regenerate this area and put this dark past behind it. But on the other hand, the fact that it's a huge mess out there.
Also, there's a difference between making something safe from a proliferation point of view and dealing with its environmental consequences. So I think that all over the former Soviet Union, there are examples of serious environmental legacies that are still unaddressed, many of them involving nuclear materials. I personally explored the Yenisei River, which is filled with tiny bits of plutonium that washed out of broken fuel rods in a reactor in Krasnoyarsk. And there are places, Novaya Zemlya was the other Soviet test site in the Arctic. There's never been a Semipalatinsk type of operation to clean it up. We know that the Soviets sometimes sank nuclear materials into the bottom in Novaya Zemlya, or left it in caves. So I think we're not anywhere near finished if your criteria is the legacy on the environment.